Hey everybody, it's Avi Tenenbaum. I have a special class for you today for TFRP about Simchas Torah. And I feel this time it's important for me to share a little bit about myself. I know I didn't make a proper video one time all about who I am and why I'm doing this. But in short, one of the reasons we're making these videos is because I want there to be a place of content for people that things don't go so easy for them. It's extra hard. They feel that they're not always understood. Their needs aren't always met. And today we're going to talk about Simchas Torah. And, when Simchas Torah comes, obviously this is a very happy and beautiful day, but for some people, it's a day of sadness. They're kind of sitting out on the side. They're not connected to Torah. Torah may be a source of pain for them, or they're just not into learning Torah and they don't understand, why do I have to bother with this? I feel guilt every year that I'm not into this. I'm not sure what to do about it. I tried hard in yeshiva and it didn't work out. There's all sorts of people like that. There are people that they learn Torah, but they get burned out very easily. And we're trying to understand, how could we reconnect those people to the Torah? And I hope that this video is going to be some sort of bridge for those types of followers and viewers. So I hope this is l'to'eles for you. And if you know somebody that this type of topic can benefit, a yeshiva bacher, a person in kollel, it could be a Jewish woman, but a person that they've been really disfranchised and alienated from the Torah, and it's really hard for them. And Simchas Torah is not only not a happy day, it's either a bland, I can't wait till it finishes day, or it's a, I feel guilty, here I am again having no shaychus to Torah day. Okay, so that video is for you. And therefore, I feel obligated to share a little bit about myself. Okay, I absolutely love Torah. Torah is my life. This Shabbos, I sat in the Beis Medrash instead of lying down. I sat in the Beis Medrash 3-4 hours in a row and learned 4 or 5 blot of Gemara. It was so sweet. It was beautiful. But it wasn't always that way. And I want you to understand a little bit of where I'm coming from, so you could say, oh, there's a real person, at least one in the world, that it was hard for him and he had to figure this out. He went on this rough journey. He came through to the other side. He's a bit relatable, and maybe he has some tips and pointers that I can relate to and use to grow and strengthen my connection to the Torah. Now, why would I even proselytize people to be connected to the Torah? The answer is because if it's part of your religion and it's around you all the time, so number one, out of a matter of convenience, it's probably easier to live a Jewish life connected to Torah than not, because you're culturally Jewish. But that's not really the answer. The answer is, when we connect to the Torah properly, it gives us such simcha, it gives us such joy and such meaning and such purpose and faith, and it helps us rise above all of our troubles, and it makes us greater people. It helps us overcome our evil inclination. It protects us. It does every wonderful thing that you can imagine that it does. But the problem is, a lot of us, we have a traumatic relationship to Torah, because people that told us about these things, they were bad role models. They ended up treating us the wrong way, being mean to us, shaming us, maybe abusing us sexually, emotionally, all sorts of things like this. Or maybe we were just a really good person. We tried to learn Torah and it was a complete flop, and yeshiva became a big grinding stone and just ground us down day by day, another time, another day, that we're stupid and we're dumb, we don't understand anything, we don't remember anything, and then we would leave yeshiva and now we're a failure because we're leaving, and that whole thing. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Please, guys, by the way, give a like to this video. When you give likes, it helps other people to see that it was a popular video, they watch it, and then they benefit from it too. So that's my introduction. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and my journey to being disfranchised from Torah and then coming close to the Torah and loving it like nothing else. That'll be part 1 of this video. Part 2 is going to be a beautiful Dvar Torah on Simchas Torah that I think we can all appreciate. And that helps us too, because A, it'll give us a way to approach Simchas Torah and really enjoy it and think about it. And 2, if you're at a meal, you'll be able to share a nice Dvar Torah. So here we go. When I was a child, and I'm not going to make this too long, we're going to try to skip and go through this as fast as possible, and I'm looking through my lucky yellow notes to guide me. When I was a child, I had a lot of learning and behavioral problems. I was considered a special ed kid. I was in special education enrichment classes. I had tons of behavioral issues. I couldn't sit in my chair. I had what they called a lack of Sitzfleisch. You would for sure call me today ADD, call me what you want. I couldn't sit and learn. I didn't remember. I didn't want to do my homework. I was unpopular. I was bullied. I was kicked in the stomach, hands held behind my back, beaten up, names called. It was terrible for me to be a kid. It was a terrible, traumatic experience, school was just the worst place in the world. And whether it was from the teachers, whether it was from my peers, school was a living Gehenna for me. Okay, no child deserves to feel that way, but for whatever reason, that's how it turned out for me. And my parents, they put so much time and effort into me, money into me, and they tried to get me special assessments and help, and it just wasn't enough. Okay, and it's not any of their shortcoming, but that happens sometimes. Okay, as I went through elementary school, being beaten up and excluded from games and completely failing in my homework and in my classwork, what happens is you become lower and lower in popularity in school, because if you get good grades, then you gain popularity as being smart, being capable. You get popularity and attention from the teacher. You get popularity from your classmates who adore you for being smart and ask for your help. They respect you. If you're good at sports, you get help that way. I wasn't good at sports. I wasn't good academically. I was the worst in every area, and my rank in popularity sank more and more and more. Every year, it got worse and worse. So I was the black sheep of the school in every way, sitting on the sidelines, the most lonely, alienated, miserable kid, and then having this dagger hanging over my head all the time where there's going to be more homework, I'm not going to understand what I'm doing, all the help I'm getting isn't enough, I'm never going to make it, my teacher is going to frown upon me, my peers are going to frown upon me, I'm never going to get anywhere, and it's just this. I'm sorry to use this example, but I am going to use it because I just feel genuine using it. It was like a Holocaust on a small scale, and of course I don't mean to belittle the Holocaust, but imagine the reality of a young child every day sent back to the work camp, to the labor camp, another day, lifting loads that he can't bear for whatever reason, and it's not working out, and there's no end in sight. Hours a day of this happening, and then you're a good kid, you want to do good, you get disciplined, then you keep showing up in the principal's office, and everyone's looking down at you and talking in front of you about, what do we do with this kid, how many times do you have to be there, why aren't you learning the lesson, and this type of thing. So imagine years and years and years of this. And then it creeps now into vacation, it creeps into summer, because since I didn't do enough good scores during the school year, so now during the summer I have to do extra math work and extra English work and extra this and extra that and extra Gemara learning. And the town starts looking at you, the shul, everyone starts saying you're the stupid kid, you're the messed up kid. Okay? This was my experience in a nutshell. I switched from a modern Orthodox, somewhat mixed school to a very yeshivish school at some point on my own volition. I thought if I changed location, things would be different, and that's a common belief that people have, right? If you just change your physical place, I'll just move to America, I'll just move to California, I'll just move to Israel, and everything will be better, and nothing at all changed. I mean, my surroundings changed, but the problems that were in my heart and in my head didn't change, and again, the same thing, an onslaught of shame and difficulty in the second school, which was now a very yeshivish school. I'm going to tell you now a story about one of the schools I was in, and you'll get a glimpse at what it was like for me to be a kid. And this story in particular tore a gash in my heart for many years, and I've healed from that for many years, but it's good for me to say the story once in a while, so educators hear this story, tell this to teachers. If you are married to a teacher, if you're a teacher, it's a good story to hear. Sometimes we make games for children, to teach them Gemara, to teach them Chumash, Jewish history, secular history, whatever. And so I had a teacher who I know he meant well, he had good intentions. And he made a game where he took the class and he split us into 4 groups, okay? So there were 2 guys, if I'm not mistaken, in group number 1, and they were geniuses. And these are the types of guys that everything comes easy for them. They were born into the perfect family with the highest IQ and the best academic acumen. Is that a right word? I haven't used that word in a decade probably, right? They're just all put together and they sit down like an angel and they listen to the teacher, they remember it all, they write it down, and it's like an angel in our midst, right? This perfect student. And of course he gets all the attention and his peers look up to him, and a kid like me is jealous of that kid because in my heart I really work hard, I want to do good. Why should I lose out, okay? But so there were 2 ones in the class, okay. So the Rebbe assigned 2 1s, and then there were 2s. So let's say that a 2 is the guy that he usually gets an A, but once in a while he gets a B. His mother kind of says, Shimon, you got a B, you usually get an A, you got to be careful. Okay, Mom, right? So his life is pretty good, things are going okay. And, he has what to show for himself. He doesn't work too hard, he applies himself a little bit, and the results come, right? He asks water from the rock, and water comes forth. That's simple, right? He has to ask, but when he asks predictably, his grades soar, and he gets his attention and his success, and it works out. So let's say you had a bunch of kids like this. Let's say maybe the majority of the class was like that, okay? So that's the average good kid. So he had the 1s, the 2s, then he had the 3s. And I'm asking my camera crew if they know the story. Do you know the story? My camera crew never heard the story. Okay, so this is the first time he's listening to. Then he had the 3s. And the 3s, I would say there was like 5 or 6 3s, and those are like the kids, they're always getting C's, and if they're lucky and they work really, really hard with their tutor, they'll get, some B's, and the Rebbe will kind of sugarcoat their grades and tell the parents, Gavaldik, he works really hard, he's really trying, and, hopefully that's good enough to make the kid maybe think that he has something worthwhile about him, right? And that was the 3s. Then he had the 4s. So guess who the 4s were? There were only 2 4s. So this is a class of like 25 kids, okay? There was Avi Tenenbaum, who was a 4, and one other kid. The other kid was a nice kid who also had tons of behavioral issues. He was a nice kid, but he couldn't sit and learn. His mom was dying from cancer. His father was very involved in his mother's health and well-being. And so he was basically an orphan while his parents were alive, running around, not always having, lunches, not being dressed properly, things kind of flying around. And this is back in the early 90s. So it wasn't like 2022. Hopefully today things are better and there's more organizations and more awareness. But things were different back then. So there was him and me. We were the 4s. So can you imagine a kid whose mom is dying, and he's going to the hospital seeing her wither away and die, her hair falling out, and he's now classified as a 4. So I don't know what he felt like. I never met him again after school, so I never spoke to him. As far as I know, he's still alive. I don't know where he is. And there was me. And I'm the good kid. I really cared. I really tried. When the Rebbe says that you're a 4, you know what that means? The whole class knows that you're a 4, and the Rebbe even said so. So it's not enough that you're stupid, you're officially stupid, right? You're stamped stupid. You've got the kashrus of stupidity. Can you imagine the shame? How much that broke my heart. And I already was working so hard, and it was never enough, and now it's even worse, okay? That's an example of how the road to hell is paved in good intentions, and how educators out there, we really need to anticipate and understand how education works. Make sure to build Talmidim and not destroy them in the process, and follow people that are good role models for education, whoever that may be, okay? So that's just a glimpse of me walking around. If it wasn't bad enough, now I was a 4. Now, at the end of elementary school, you get to high school, you guessed it. No high school in America would take a kid like me, because you always need your Rebbes in elementary school to go to bat for you to get into a high school. And they couldn't sell me. I was an inferior product, and they tried, and they were good Rebbeim. No yeshiva would take me. And I'm not exaggerating. My father, who's a wonderful guy, Talmid Chacham, he works hard, he's a good father. He took me on the plane across America, I think 10 times at least. I just don't want to exaggerate. I want to say 15, but at least 10 times we were in yeshivas, and we were turned down across America. No yeshiva would take me. So all your friends are busy getting into this yeshiva and that yeshiva and the third yeshiva. Oh, Avi, where are you going to yeshiva? Oh, I don't know. I don't want to say names of the yeshivas, and it's not their fault. I didn't have much to offer. I'm not going to blame any yeshiva. I couldn't get into any yeshiva in America, and that's not an exaggeration, except one. Except one. And that yeshiva is so different, let's say nicely, that even with the shred of dignity I had left, if I would have gone to that yeshiva, I would have lost that dignity. Because it's like the yeshiva for the type of people that I knew I wasn't in my mind. I was an intelligent person. I was a bright person. I had a big, good heart. but there was just something about me that I was living in chaos and I couldn't put this together, okay? You can understand years later why I'm involved in so many different things and maybe even why I'm making these videos, because I have a lot of these experiences that I want to impart with you. If you're watching this in new identity, it never came easy for me, okay? My father begged a nice yeshiva, a good yeshiva in America, to take me in, begged and begged and begged, and finally an elderly Rosh Yeshiva there took me in, and 2 weeks later, I think, he died. So my whole connection and protectia, the protection that I had in the yeshiva, died with him, and before you know it, I was thrown out of that yeshiva too. So now I'm sitting at home. I was involved in being wild and in girls and all the things that I shouldn't have been doing. And then an educator from somewhere else in America moved onto our street in Chicago, where I come from, and my father is pouring his heart out to this, educator who came from Western United States, and my father says, I can't get my son into any yeshiva, and this wonderful guy says, have you ever heard of such and such yeshiva? And my father says, no, I never heard of that before. Tell me about it. And it sounded like a perfect fit, and before you know it, I flew to that yeshiva, I took a test, I got in. And I have to tell you, that yeshiva saved my life. It was one of the first steps of turning me around. And what that yeshiva did was, it gave me the space, the understanding, the unconditional positive regard of saying, okay, here's a problematic kid. Let's give him room. Let's give him time. Let's be patient with him. Let's understand there's stuff going on inside of him, and this will resolve itself and will gently guide him. It's not going to happen overnight. And they did a great job. So 10th grade, I was still doing shenanigans, involved in some crime and graffiti and fighting with people outside of the yeshiva. We would get in these really good brawls with the people in the neighborhood, and we would do crazy pranks, and I would make napalm and crazy stuff. If you know me back from yeshiva, hit the like button. You know it's true, right? And that was 10th grade. In 11th grade, that's when I started to turn around. I'm going to tell you another major story, 2 stories. One is, I had a Rebbe in the yeshiva, a certain Rebbe that I was somewhat close to, and I saw that he started to go through terrible pain and suffering in Yisurim, like really, really unbelievably terrible, sad stories, where the first Yisurim that he went through cascaded and turned into a second problem, and a third problem, and a fourth problem, and before you know it, his life was filled with untold suffering. And he would sit in the Beis Medrash late at night, and he would dive into the Torah and be swimming in the light of Torah, and somehow he found the Torah to be this safe place of refuge and of understanding and of joy. And I never saw somebody that was so chashuv. They were an adult, they were a Rebbe, an authority figure, they were truly suffering in a terrible way, and they were truly learning Torah on the highest level, and the Torah was rising them up above their challenges. And this is something I talk about a lot in the videos. That was the first person that I ever saw do that. I just saw a real live person suffering terribly, jumping into the Torah, and the Torah raising him up. I never saw such a thing, and I saved that information for later. I was still doing my shenanigans, still being completely wild. I was getting in trouble. And then there was a local bakery in this tiny little town where the yeshiva was. It's like, nowadays there's probably some more Jewish families there. Back then, there weren't a lot of Jews. And so there was one single kosher bakery in the town. Okay? Back in the early 2000s, I'm talking about. No. Back in the end of the 90s. I'm talking about in the later end of the 90s. That's what I'm referring to, okay? So the guy who owns the bakery had leftover cookies, pastries at the end of the day, and he couldn't sell it the next day because it would be stale, right? So he would bring it to the yeshiva and arrange with a guy that anybody who would sit and learn after night seder for 15 extra minutes, they would be allowed to take a cookie. Now remember, I never sat a day in my life. I could not sit down. I never sat in a class. I barely finished elementary school. I'm tanking and failing in high school. My grades are terrible. The yeshiva was good to me. They were patient, but that didn't mean that my grades were magically getting better yet. And I could not sit for a minute, okay? Every attentional issue that you think you have, I probably had. Behavioral issue, I had it all. I had it all. Authority figure issues, I had all of it, okay? I don't know, ODD, ADD, all the stuff all together, elemental P, I had it all. And I was dying to have the kosher cookies. It's the only way I can get kosher cookies except traveling on a bus 45 minutes across town to this bakery. So I forced myself at 10 o'clock when Night Seder finished. I'm going to force myself. I'm going to dial Kiddush Hashem at all costs. I'm going to make myself stay in the Beis Medrash for 15 minutes just to get the cookie. I don't care about Torah. I don't care about learning. But I sure care about cookies. I'm going to do anything for a cookie. So I did this, but there was a problem. I couldn't sit for 15 minutes. That's a skill that some people have. I couldn't do it. I'm already age, 15. I couldn't sit for that long. I said, I don't care. I need the cookies. I'm going to walk laps in the Beis Medrash in circles for 15 minutes until I get the cookie. I did it. I almost exploded, but I did it. I walked in circles in the Beis Medrash 15 extra minutes. The second night, I did it again, but I started to walk around a little bit slower. And then as the nights went on, I started getting more used to being in the Beis Medrash. And I started noticing the people that would stay later, and I started noticing what they were learning, and I would say, hey, what's this sefer about? What's that about? What are you guys discussing? And it got really interesting, and I said, what? These people are learning Torah after they're allowed to go back to the dormitory? Why would they even do that? They're not even running to get the cookies. Maybe they like learning Torah. What's so good about learning Torah? It doesn't even make sense. It's old, it's boring, it's not relevant to me, it's hard. And slowly but surely, while getting the cookies, I started to discover that Torah is really beautiful and full of meaning. And I said, wow. And it opened up my eyes. And the first sefer that I tried to learn is Mesilas Yesharim, and I have that edition that I learned back then, still in my house. It's very dear to me. I couldn't read a word. You have to understand, I was a decade behind in school. I could not read Hebrew. I could not read Hebrew. So I had to take a dictionary and the Mesilas Yesharim, and word by word ask people, what does this mean? What does that mean? And write it in, and stay hours on my own, writing it in, figuring it out, reading it over and over. I barely understood anything. And the problem is this: when you work hard and you want to do good, but it never comes easy, it wears you down. It wears you down. You get burned out. And so if you don't do anything, you don't get burned out. If you start to really exert yourself and it gets hard and it wears down your mental resources, you get burned out. So now, what do? So I'm working so hard to understand Mesilas Yesharim. I'm years behind in learning Gemara. I don't know any Jewish knowledge. I don't know Mishnayos. I don't know nothing. Okay? And I was in the yeshiva system and I grew up from, and I know nothing. But I'm slowly trying to make a comeback. And then finally it's 12th grade. In 12th grade I'm sitting and learning, just not really understanding much, but I'm working and I'm pushing and I'm trying. And now the question is, where do you go from here? We're almost done with section A, and then we'll get into section B of this video. So now I'm finishing high school, and I get an A for effort. I'm not sure how much I really knew how to learn Gemara, but it was definitely better than before. And I'm slowly catching up, and if I was at 0%, so now I'm at 7%, which is 7% more than 0, but I'm still pretty far behind, right? Comes time for post-high school. Something in my soul said, I have to go to Israel. It made absolutely no sense. I had no family in Israel. I was not trained. Avi, you have to go to Israel after high school. I could have stayed. My friends were staying. Something in my soul said, I have to go to Israel. It was irrational. It was maybe metaphysical. I went to Israel. Well, what yeshiva do I go to in Israel? My grandmother, Alea Hashalom, used to run some projects with a very special Chashav Rosh Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, who runs a top yeshiva in Israel. And she made a phone call, and my father made a phone call, and before you know it, I took a faher. I bombed the faher, but the yeshiva didn't make too much of it, and I got into this top yeshiva. And when I say a top yeshiva, I mean, it is objectively on one of the highest levels of any yeshiva in the world, and I'm proud to say that, and I stand by that statement, and I'll defend it. You can't imagine such a high-level yeshiva, such high level of learning and avodas Hashem and tefillah, just a real yeshiva, almost like the types that existed in pre-war Europe. I couldn't believe this place existed, and as chashav as the Rabbeim were, the Bachram were chashav too. I couldn't believe it. There were Bachram that finished Shas, there were Bachram that were learning Mishnah Berurah and knew how to pass on Shailas, and it was the type of yeshiva that you already knew how to learn Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos, and Rishonim, and Chas v'Shalom Achronim, right? Because in that yeshiva they're like more into the Rishonim than the Achronim, before you get to the Shir. And then Shir is to help you understand how the Rosh Hashiva understands the Gemara. It's not that they teach you the Gemara, you teach yourself. Then they show you how a seasoned Talmud Chacham learned it, and you compare and contrast. That was the level of the yeshiva. I come in with all these big desires to be successful, but I'm at my 7th percentile level of Gemara skills. And I need to be 100% in a top yeshiva. So it's only an uphill battle that I can't win. It's a battle of attrition. So it's great that I'm in a great yeshiva, and I truly learned to appreciate Talmidei Chachamim and the great high levels people can attain through Torah learning and Torah understanding. And I saw things that you couldn't believe. I saw things you cannot imagine. I saw people that would learn till 2, 3 a.m. at night. I saw people that would put their feet in cold water just to stay awake, to learn more and learn more, not in an obsessive way, in a way out of joy. And these were people that today are huge Talmidei Chachamim. You never saw anything like it, okay? I saw people that when there was a fast day, when it was Bein Hazmanim, they would be in the Beis Medrash all day, all night. There was learning on Friday, learning on Shabbos, Motzai Shabbos, no break from learning. Learning became our life. It was the sweetest, greatest thing. But my skills weren't up to par. And so this created a huge problem. And it created for me depression, anxiety, shame, and this whole persona where I had to maintain on the outside that I understood, but on the inside I'm suffering and getting squished by everything that's going on because it was just too hard to keep up with everything that's happening. Well, maybe I should leave and go to a different yeshiva. Yeah, but that's shameful because you're in this yeshiva, right? The chashav yeshiva. And so you're like, darned if you do and darned if you don't, and you're trapped in this place. And somehow I had to keep fighting, and it was a real war. It was a real battle. And when I feel like a war veteran, that's what it was like. It never came easy. The first day I walked into this yeshiva, a guy looked at me, I didn't even know his name, and he says to me, if you don't learn like Reb Chaim Brisker, then it's not considered learning. And then he walks away with his nose up in the air. Right? That was the first taste I ever got of this yeshiva. It's like a level above anything I expected, okay? But I'm the broken kid who doesn't have the zitzfleisch, who doesn't have the internal skills to sit down and learn. And learning becomes a source of shame because you're meant to understand, you're meant to raise your hand and share and ask good questions to the Rebbe. You're meant to show the Rebbe that you understand what he's saying and ask the smart question to get the attention and all that. And I couldn't do that. And then it's worse because there were some guys, they would roll out of bed 15 minutes before Shir. They didn't open up a Gemara in 3 weeks, but they were geniuses. So right away they asked the smart questions, they understood everything right away. They jimmied the system, they hijacked the system. They got all the attention, they got all the credit, people were quoting their name, the brilliant question that they asked, the teretz that they gave. And Avi Tenenbaum is sitting on the side, breaking his head, smashing himself, trying to understand, not really ever getting anywhere, here and there getting little sound bites. That was my experience, okay? So it never was easy, and it's even harder for good reasons, but it wasn't any easier. And if my learning skill in Gemara went maybe now up, it went from 7 to 14. But that's still not 100%, right? It got really hard. Eventually, I learned some important lessons from this experience, and then we're going to start section 2. And I'm going to give you tips if you identified with who I was and where I came from. Because today, I'm not in that place. But because I was in that place and had to pass through that school of hard knocks, right? I had to learn a number of lessons. Number one, to understand that Torah is very hard and takes a long time to learn. It takes a long time to understand. It's not easy to remember. It's not easy to comprehend objectively. And it's the long haul. And the fact that it's easier for other people, don't compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself today to who you were yesterday. And we're going to get to that later on in this video, because that's the lesson of Rabbi Nachman in his stories. There's the story of the wise man and the simpleton, the chacham and the tam, and his wife in that story says to the shoemaker husband, people make better shoes than you. And he says, number one, that's his shoes. These are my shoes. I have a different product. I'm a different shoemaker than him. And number two, why compare? So he makes it these 2 points. Rabbi Nachman says these are 2 distinct points. Zeh ma'aseh shelo v'zeh ma'aseh shari. That's point one. V'oid lama lanu ledaber ba'acherim. So we'll get to that later in the video. But don't compare yourself. I learned that everyone has their own place in the Torah, but you have to go find it. Everybody is special. Everybody is unique. Everybody has smart things about them, interests and talents, and it's about finding your unique place in the Torah, and then you'll thrive there, and then it will come easier. And then the more you adapt it and you scale the Torah learning towards you and who you are and make it work for you, it will work out better. So I'm going to explain in detail what I mean by that. But that was my experience. And eventually I rose up in yeshiva to be one of the best guys in the yeshiva. I'm no Talmud Chacham, I'm no Gadol Hador, but compared to where I'm coming from, it was miraculous, okay? And I ended up running learning programs in that yeshiva and eventually going to Kollel. And then in Kollel, Rabbanim told me that I should leave and go into psychotherapy and go to university, and that kind of dictates the rest of my history. And then taking my learning skills and psychotherapy skills and kind of putting it together to create videos like this to help real Bachrim and young women and all sorts of people out there that can identify with such a struggle and learn lessons and say, hey, at least somebody else can understand me. What are his tips? Let's see how to grow, okay? So that's where we're up to so far. So I want now to get into some specific tips. Now we're going to start part 2 of the video. After working with Bachrim and seminary students for a number of years and having been a person in the story that I just told you, and I learn Torah all the time and I love Torah and it's the sweetest, greatest thing in my life, and having studied psychotherapy, I identified a number of particular issues that come up for students that are trying to learn Torah, and this whole chaotic maelstrom of interaction between the learning not working well, it breaking you down as a person and making you depressed, you feeling shame, you trying even harder, but then the Torah kind of being even farther out of your reach and you being broken down as a person. I try to identify in words, what are some of the main issues, people that I've met over the years, what have they dealt with and what did I deal with? I'm going to put those into words, and I hope this could be l'to'eles, to Rabbeim, and to people themselves who are in this struggle. One of the issues is shame. Because everybody needs to feel that they are a useful, productive person in society. They need to be held of by their peers, and I don't mean in an unhealthy way that we're dependent on other people to feel good, but on a very basic level. You show up to work every day, you sit down and do your job, and you're part of the team, and you're part of society, you have a good contribution to the world, and you feel like a mensch, and people need you for what you're good at, and you kind of find your role in the world, right? When you're in a educational institution, whether it's elementary school, high school, or yeshiva, post-high school, and you aren't learning well, you don't have an identity. You don't have a role. You aren't important to society. And you're full of shame. And you're just flying like a dibbuk in no man's land all the time. And you have a need to create some sort of a persona to carry around and pretend that things are okay, and pretend that you kind of understand, but really inside you're really suffering and you're being destroyed on the inside. Your soul is rotting away, okay? I know people that from these situations they've become suicidal, they've fallen into addiction. You can't live in such a place for a sustainable amount of time because it is a living Gehenna in this world to be in that kaf hakela place. And I am on purpose using those mishalim because it really is that way. There's no resting place for you because in shir, your Rebbe knows that you're the dumbbell and you have no intelligent things to add, and you're sitting on the side and you feel like a loser, right? And in the base medrash, people ask you questions, hey, how did you understand this taisvis? And you don't know nothing, so you feel stupid and you gotta make up, I forgot how I understood it, come back to me later, and you kind of just wing it, right? And you kind of have to put on this fake game to get through the day, okay? So there's all this identity issue and social anxiety stuff going on, and it is a living Gehenna. That is one set of issues that I see people have. Another set of issues I see people have is they have problems with internet pornography or forbidden relationships or eating not kosher or all sorts of things that they shouldn't be doing, and addictions. And those impure things that they're doing, they say, Avi, I'm so impure. I'm borrowing their words. I'm so impure. I just had a forbidden relationship with someone. I just looked at pornography for 6 hours. I can't sit and learn Torah. I'm the biggest hypocrite. How could I learn Torah if I just did what I did last night with so-and-so? How could I learn Torah if I just looked at pornography for 3 hours? If I'm so tummy, how could that be if my head is filled with such garbage? So now there's a cognitive dissonance between the religious ideals that people believe in and how they wish they can learn Torah versus who they are in their behavior. And they say, my behavior doesn't match who I should be as a learning person, and therefore I can't learn Torah. Because if I learn Torah, I'm a hypocrite, and I'm a hypocrite because I can't stop looking at pornography. Well, just stop looking at pornography. Yeah, but they're addicted. So now they're not learning and they're looking at pornography. So it can't get any worse than that, right? So their behavior alienates them from learning Torah, from the I'm impure or I'm hypocritical place. So I see that a lot as well. Okay? The next issue is more of an educational psychology issue, and that's scaffolding in the zone of proximal development, I think it's called. The idea that learning is done, and I'm not coming as a master mechanech, and I'm not going to quote, Rav Volba or any famous Gemara teacher or anything. I'm just telling you a classic Psych 101 idea that when we learn things, anything, whether it's violin or Gemara, skills have to be built upon 1% at a time, little by little, in a gradual fashion, right? You can't learn to drive in one day. That's why you have a bunch of lessons and you practice, and then eventually you get a permit, and then from a permit you could drive by yourself, and you eventually get better and better as a driver and at parking and that stuff, right? So anytime you learn anything, it takes a ton of trial and error. It takes a long time. And people don't know that. And they don't strategize and design their learning the right way. They just want to finish Shas and be done with it now. They don't realize that in order to finish Shas, to learn Chumash, to learn Mishnayos, to learn Torah, you have to have the right strategy. You have to learn the right amount. Maybe less is more. And I wrote a wonderful article on this. A lot of people got so much chizik. I think it's on the Times of Israel blog. If you put into Google Times of Israel, Gangster Tortoise, I think that's the name of the article or something like this. I bring a story there about a real incredible person that I know who every year came to Simchas Torah and he could never do Shnai Mikra and he never finished Chumash and Rashi and he felt like such a dimwit. And he said, you know what? I'm not doing scaffolding. I'm going to learn one pasuk a day with Rashi. I'm not going to do a whole parsha. I did that 7 years. It didn't work. I'm going to do a pasuk a day with Rashi. And I'm going to be consistent. And I'm going to tell myself why that's worth it. And I'm going to put one foot in front of the other year after year until I finish. And you know the crazy thing? He called me years later and told me that he finished. And I wrote the article in his honor. You can look up the article. Maybe we can put it into the video description. Camera crew, if you could remind me, we'll put that in the video description, the link to the article, okay? He finished Chumash because he did scaffolding. He did piece by piece at the right pace where it wasn't going to burn him out. And he built on that. And after he finished, and it took him like 7 years, he said, now I'm going to do 2 psukim a day with Rashi. And he hasn't called me since. You know what that means? He's not done yet. But that's okay. Because he already showed himself he could do it. He's going to finish this time too. And it's going to get easier it's going to get easier and easier and easier. And that's how it works. We don't understand that. And so when we're in yeshiva as talmidim, or when we have students in our class, we just want to shove the Gemara in their face and, let them just understand everything right away. It takes time. It takes a long time to know where the Gemara starts, where it stops, where the question marks, what's benichusa, what's a tema, how to read a taisvis. When he quotes Rashi, is he arguing with Rashi? He's agreeing with Rashi. Are there 3 teirutzim, 2 teirutzim? It's a very ambiguous, obscure thing. The Chazal itself say about Talmud Bavli, "B'machshakim hoshivani zeh Talmud Bavli." It's very hard. It's dark. It's just not easy. So we give ourselves the patience and the understanding and the self-compassion and the space in the room and the time to not know and to be okay with not knowing and to do a little bit at a time, and that's how you get somewhere worthwhile. Okay? To work on consistency, because your voice is going to say, "Oh, you're just doing 1 Mishnah a day. You're never going to get anywhere." So now you have to learn how to work on your internal voices in your head and say, "I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to do another Mishnah and another Mishnah. Oh, but you didn't understand it," right? And your internal dialogue is always shutting you down and telling you why it's not enough and why you're never going to get anywhere. And you have to learn how to negotiate the inner negative self-talk. And I'm not going to make a video just on that now, but that's a skill for life you have to have. There are Goyish books on that. If you want to listen to a Goyish book on Audible or read it, it's called Can't Hurt Me from David Goggins. But the Torah talks about this so much, and we can make great videos in the future. But you have to learn to have the patience, and when the voices pop up for you, to negotiate the inner burning out, you're not good enough, you'll never get anywhere type of talk. Okay? You have to learn how to negotiate your attention, because it's very hard for people to sit and have attention on something for an hour or 2 hours. So everyone's going to run and say, "Oh, I have ADD, I can't do that." No, you could do that. You will go to an ADD coach, you'll go to a psychiatrist, you'll go to a psychologist, you'll go to somebody that knows about ADD, somebody that has attentional issues. Maybe it's a mashgiach in yeshiva that knows how to coach people like this. And you'll find strategies to learn how to focus better, how to set up your learning better. I'll give you just one example. The Baal Shem Tov says that when you learn and it's hard for you, I think this is in the Sefer Tzavos HaRivash, he says have a stack of Sfarim so that when you get burned out of this one, no problem. Just close it, and then you read that easy one. And then when you're sick of that one, you read the third one. And now it's easier to focus and you don't feel burned out. So there are ways and strategies to navigate and negotiate these things. So I've seen a lot of people that they're burned out, they're on the brink of insanity because they've struggled in all these issues. We said shame, identity issues, hypocrisy and cognitive dissonance issues, learning and scaffolding issues, consistency and attentional issues. Here's a final one for right now, and then we're going to say a cute story. Sometimes people have such profound, serious mental health issues or physical problems or habits that you just can't be successful in learning until you straighten those things out. If you can't go to bed before 4 a.m. and you can't get up before 2 p.m., you're just not ready right now for learning. You got to get your life in order. And that's what the Chazal say, derech eretz kadma laTorah. There's basic human level behavior that you have to be a functional human being. And then functional human beings, they are successful in Torah. And a lot of times people, their learning isn't going well because they're just not functional human beings yet. And that's okay. So go work on that. Derech eretz kadma laTorah. That's your first mesechta that you're going to tackle, is the derech eretz. Maybe it's about how to feel better because you have tons of anxiety and your anxiety is getting in the way of your learning. No problem. But you're not going to get anywhere in learning until you figure that out. So that's your biggest mitzvah. That's your first mesechta. That's your first taisvis. Go learn up that taisvis of anxiety. Figure that out. Get professional help. Get help from the right rabbeim and people that can coach you in that. And then you'll see that your learning is going to take off and soar. Okay? Now I'm going to tell you a story. There was a guy, and this is a story about scaffolding and about adapting yeshiva to you so that you are successful, as opposed to doing what you're supposed to do and getting nowhere. And I'm not saying to break yeshiva rules, But I think there's a lot of room within yeshiva that you can work with your Rebbe, and he'll guide you and show you how you can find your own way of learning even in the yeshiva and grow. So let me tell you a story. There is a real human being, a real person. When he was in yeshiva with us, we all laughed at him. We all laughed at this guy. Because if my learning wasn't up to par, it was still better than his. There's always somebody worse than you, right? If I was in the back of the race, he was in the end. I was like third place, he was in last place, okay? Everything came so hard to him. And he just didn't quickly understand things. He just didn't. But he was the hardest worker I ever saw in my life. He had such tenacity. He was ferocious. He was ferocious. We would make fun of him. This is a true story, what I'm telling you, and I want you to tell this story to other people to get chizuk. And if you are the one that you're hearing the story about you, give me a call because I miss you and I didn't speak to you for a long time. This guy would sit with a Gemara Shabbos after night seder in yeshiva. Do you know the story? The camera crew knows the story. He would sit with a Gemara Shabbos and he would read an art scroll Shabbos. And we would laugh at him. We were in a top yeshiva. Art scroll itself is embarrassing. You have an art scroll. We're in a top yeshiva. He would sit there with an art scroll. He was honest about where he was holding. He would read the art scroll, cover to cover that year, going through Maseches Shabbos. And we laughed at him and we poked fun of him and we said, you got nothing out of that. You wasted your time. The only way to learn is be'iyun. You'll never be a Talmud Chacham. You'll never develop your skills. And we really harassed him. In the name of good, right? The next year he buys an Oz V'Hadar Shabbos. And this is when Oz V'Hadar was first invented. Yes, there was a time when it was invented. I was alive at that time. And he brings in this 9,000-page Maseches Shabbos from Oz V'Hadar. And he takes the art scroll and the Oz V'Hadar side by side. He starts writing in the words, going like this. The whole year, that's all he did. Writes in the words, writes in the words. And we say, what are you doing, wasting all your time? You know nothing, you're a nobody. Second year he does this. The third year he reads Maseches Shabbos from the Oz V'Hadar with the words written in. He doesn't even do Rashi some of the times. And we say, you know nothing, I'm a aretz, he's going to be a dumb balabas. And we're talking about how stupid he is. The fourth year, this is a 4-year-long story, he buys a whole bookshelf of English halacha books. So he buys like Shabbos Home and Shabbos Kitchen and Rabbi Ribbiat's Lamates Melachos book and stuff like this. And we say, what an Amaretz, we learn Shach and Taz, we learn Tur and Beis Yosef, we learn the Rambam, we learn the Sugya first, we really know how to do it. We're like heavy lifters, right? And this guy's busy balabassing away. Fast forward a bunch of years, he's not even 30 years old, and he starts giving a halacha shir in the Mir Yeshiva. We know nothing in halacha. He is giving a halacha shir in the Mir Yeshiva. And you know why? You know how he passed us all up? Because the tortoise wins the race. He scaffolded his learning to his level. Instead of lying and doing the pretend show, the yeshivish pretend show, he was honest in the Fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu with where he was holding. He didn't let his ego get in the way. He didn't let social pressure get in the way. He believed in himself. He looked towards the future, and he worked with himself like an entrepreneur in business, right? You have a concept, and everyone says you won't make money, but you keep doing it till you get there. That's what he did. 1%, 2%, 3%, and now he passed us all up. And who has the last laugh? Him. Except he's a sweet person, so he won't laugh at us. That's how you do it. So if you say, Avi, my learning skills are so far away from learning where they have to be, don't worry. But let's do scaffolding. Let's be honest. Let's find our place in learning and work from there and move forward. I've seen over 20 plus years, soon 30 years, of people working on certain things all day, all night, careers, Torah learning. And you see that when people work on things for 20, 30 years in a row, you get somewhere. If you build a business 20, 30 years in a row, you got a nice business. It has a few branches already. Okay? When you work on your learning, think 20, 30 years ahead. That's how this works. Maybe more. When I make learning goals today, I make it for 5 to 15 years ahead. That's how I do it. It's a long, long game. And it involves many times of sitting down unspectacularly and learning another little bit of Gemara with Rashi, another little bit of Gemara with Rashi, more and more till you get somewhere. That's how this works. And dealing with that self-talk and bringing it down to a level where you can actually do it and not just doing the right way to do it, which you can't do and getting nowhere. Okay? Let's go now to the next part of the shir. Rabbi Nachman says in Meshivas Nefesh Vav, Meshivas Nefesh Aleph, and in Lukuti Moran Vav, that if a person wants to be successful in Avodas Hashem, he has to be a Baki B'Ratzoi in Baki B'Shov, which basically in English means you have to be really good at two things. A, you have to know how to encourage yourself when you feel like you're not getting anywhere. And then B, you have to know how to get yourself up to work harder when you feel like you've already accomplished everything. Because sometimes you feel, oh, I know everything. I don't have to work any harder. And then other times you feel like, oh, I'm getting nowhere. What's the point? And you have to know how to negotiate both situations. And Reb Nachman says that the more you're good at negotiating both of those common human situations that we're in, you'll be able to deal with all that life throws your way. And then you'll always be able to learn. So you need to know how to learn when you're burned out. You need to know how to learn a sefer when you've learned it 5 times already and you feel like you don't need to learn it a 6th time. You need both of those skills. In fact, I'll throw in a story. When I learned Sefer Lukuti Moharan, which is a very long, esoteric, difficult sefer for the first time, and this was after I covered maybe 30, 40 svarim, cover to cover, and I got to Lukuti Moharan, I couldn't get anywhere. I got bogged down. It's like trying to run through a thick forest, okay? And I went to Rav Nassan Maimon, who's a famous Talmud Chacham who finished that sefer hundreds of times, and I said to him, what do I do? And he said, take a little sticky note thing, a little sticker, and every time that you completely give up and go bonkers from learning 2 words of Lukuti Moharan, just put the sticker there. Then go get burned out. No problem. Be burned out. Take your 2 days to lose your mind. But when you continue from your sticker and keep moving the sticker forward another time and another time and another time, and tell yourself that this is worthwhile until you eventually finish it. And when you finish it this way, you'll see the whole sefer will shrink. And all of a sudden you've finished it and you'll start to understand it easier. It took me 4 years, but I did it. I did this with Shas Mishnayos. I'm doing this with Shas itself. I'm not done yet, but I'm on the way. I did this with Shas Mishnayos many times. I did this with learning Tanakh. I did this with learning Sifrei Musar, Sifrei Halacha. Okay, that's how this works. You got to work with yourself and be patient. Work with the self-dialogue. Put your derech eretz of life in place. Have a good schedule. Have good strategies and tactics. Understand that what you're doing is worthwhile. Be patient. When you get burned out, take care of yourself. But don't just get burned out and fly away for 6 months. When you're burned out, you say, okay, I'll take some time to relax. You're allowed to do that. And then I'm going to come right back at it. But I can barely learn. No problem. So you'll learn 1 sentence. You'll learn 1 word. The guy who finished Chumash over 7 years, 1 pasuk a day with Rashi. In the article I write about how he told me in the interview, sometimes he couldn't even learn it all. So he just read the Dibur Hamaskil of a Rashi, or he just read the number of the pasuk. But in the end he won. And in the end he grew his skills and got more zitzfleish and is on the way to becoming a Talmud Chacham. Okay? And by the way, he's a social worker now too. So he's going to be a fantastic therapist and we wish him success. Let's keep going and wrap up the shir. Okay? So when I was a yeshiva bacher and I was so intent, I was actually a kollel guy at this story. I forgot the timeline. I was a kollel young man at this time, hell-bent on finishing Shas. I tried to finish Shas 1,000,000 times. I burned and fried my mind to smithereens every time. I tried too fast. I tried too hard. I learned too many blot. I tried too intensely. I demanded from myself too much level of iyun. And mamash, I destroyed my mind and my body 1,000,000,000 times, okay? One time I sat in the Breslov Mea Sharon Beis Medrash. You could see the story in the article. And I learned like 7 or 8 blot of Gemara in a row, and I felt like a loser, like I don't know anything. And even though you did 7, 8 blot of Gemara in a row, which is crazy and intense and not sustainable, and that's the ticket to be burned out, I still felt like I'm never going to finish, I'm never going to get anywhere. And I went to a Talmud Chacham. I said, who's the biggest Talmud Chacham in this room right now? And a Hasidic guy said, that guy. So I went to that guy. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Frank. And he is the father of a famous person today, Reb Mata Frank. So Rabbi Yehuda Frank, I told him my problems. I poured out my heart. I said, I'm never going to get anywhere. I'm a nobody. For years I'm trying to learn and I get nowhere. What do I do? And he said, I want you to speak to a friend of mine. And he said it with such sweetness and such humility. And he sat me down with somebody my age, 24 or 25, somebody with beautiful, long, blonde face. And he said to him in Yiddish, learn with him the story of the Chacham and the Tam. I'm going to tell you now to go and look at the story of Rabbi Nachman, the Chacham and the Tam. And it's a story about a Chacham, a wise guy, smart, very smart, who is the most miserable person. He's so intense. Nothing is good enough. He demands too much from himself. He never counts his good points. He never appreciates what he has. It's never enough, and he burns out all the time. He loses everything he has. And then you have a simpleton who's not too intelligent and is not too bright, but he's always happy, and he counts his blessings. He's so glad, even with the tiniest things that, he barely even has enough of, and he's just so happy, and in the end, he rises to be in a very high special position at the end of the story, and it was a very eye-opening story. Check it out. They say in the Navy SEALs, I've never been in the Navy SEALs, but I like watching interviews from Navy SEALs a lot because they work very physically and mentally hard. And I like hearing in the secular world the same idea. How do they work on hard things? What's their model for that? And I've heard from a number of Navy SEALs on their interviews, they say, in the Navy SEALs, at any time of their training, you can give up. It involves standing up, going to a bell, and ringing the bell in front of everybody. It's very easy, and a lot of people do it. And in a way, the only thing you need to do to be a Navy SEAL is don't ring the bell. If all you do is don't give up, you'll make it. And the problem is everybody gives up. Everybody gives up earlier, in the middle, later. Reb Nachman has a mashal about that. He talks about conquerors, that they won many wars and they finally get to the city of conquest that they want to take over. And on the door of the gate of the town, they're about to open up the door and there's a little cobweb on the door and they can't open it. Oy vey, there's a cobweb. Let's give up. Okay, never give up. Never give up. Never give up. Never, ever give up. You want to be a Navy SEAL? Just don't ring the bell and wait it out and you'll make it. That's what the Navy SEALs say. I thought that was a beautiful mashal for us. In learning Baruch Hashem, I found my way, I found my journey, I found the beauty and the sweetness of the Torah, but I had to go through a lot of pain and suffering and learn a lot of lessons to get there. It was worth every moment, and I want to share those lessons with other people so that you don't have to have as much suffering as me, and you can save some years of your life. But I don't regret it for a minute, and everything Hashem does is for the best. My learning is going great. I'm so besimcha, and it's the greatest blessing in my life to learn Torah. You have to know every single thing that you learn in Torah. You have to ask yourself, how does it apply to you specifically? The mashgiach is going to give a shmooze, and he says you should work on a certain thing, but maybe you're not ready right now to work on that thing. Maybe if you work on that, it's going to break you in half, and that's not very helpful, right? Maybe you need to take his message and adapt it to you. Maybe the Rosh Hashiva now told everyone they got to mamish, be starker, and it's a zman, or you have to be mechazik. Maybe for you to be mechazik, instead of pushing yourself more, you have to learn how to take breaks more. Each person's derech of avodas Hashem and of learning and growing is different. And I see a lot of clients, a lot of patients that come to this office, and they say, I read in a sefer, it says you should do this. And I did it, and it totally made me depressed. And I tell them, it's not that the Torah is wrong, but you have to take that step of, okay, the Torah says ABC. How do I apply that to myself? What does it mean for me right now? What do I need to do personally to get to my next step? For one person, it's trying harder. For the second person, it's trying less. Okay? Each person, that's going to look different for them. We said a lot of things about my journey in Torah, and I'm trying to portray for you that I worked hellishly hard to have what I have today. It was worth every moment. And I tried to tell you about how hard it was, and to do that so that you can identify if it's hard for you in yeshiva. You can know that even if you had it as hard as me, you can end up being a Talmud Chacham, you can learn, you can enjoy Torah. It can be the greatest blessing in your life. I'm almost crying from hisragshus because I really am so overwhelmed with joy from the blessing that the Torah gives us. It is the biggest source of happiness and joy and guidance. It's the greatest blessing in my life. Pikudei Hashem Yisharim Mesamchei Leiv, the pasuk says. Simchas Torah for me is such a happy day, but it used to be a day of shame, and now it's a day of joy. So I hope you can identify with my story, and it gives you chizuk, and you can try to analyze with your rabbeim and with the therapist, where are you kind of falling short? I remember a story of a Bucky perfectionist. He was a person that was a soaring, budding Talmud Chacham Bacher who was soaring through Shas, Masechta after Masechta, but he was a perfectionist. And so he had this thing where he would never make a siyum out of Masechta if he felt that he didn't perfectly understand it. So if on Daf Ayin Beis there was a taisvis that he didn't understand the Ri's second teretz, he wouldn't make a siyum. That's obviously, if you translate this into clinical psychology terms, that's what we call perfectionism, right? Perfectionism issues with low self-esteem, with self-perception, with anxiety. Okay, so he was a top learner, but he ended up completely disfranchising himself from Torah and learning because he demanded himself too much. So let's learn exactly what our issue is. I knew another guy who drove himself meshuga. He learned too hard, pushed himself too much, to the point where his brain just got completely fried out. He had to take a break 2-3 years from learning. Thank God he understood that burning out isn't forever. He just had to figure out how to do the scaffolding, the scaling better. He came back, and now he's learning in Kol. He's doing fantastic. He's a happy, healthy person. Okay? I was like that too, by the way. I used to learn until 2-3 in the morning when I was in first year Beis Medrash, and I would get sick all the time. And they sent me to the doctor, and the doctor said, "You idiot, you're never sleeping, you're never taking care of yourself. What do you think is going to happen?" And I didn't listen to him, and I got sick, and eventually I listened to the doctor because I had no choice. I started to exercise. I started to make a somewhat normal bedtime for myself. Okay? When you do things like that, you're going to fly in learning. Everybody knows the Chavetz Chaim had some sort of challenge with this as well. He broke down and had to take a break as well in his learning. I think that's brought down in the Rabbi Yashar English book. I know it's brought down. I've seen it inside. I've heard this from Talmidei Chachamim, and that's why the Chavetz Chaim used to turn the lights out around midnight. I think it's in the... There's a reference to this also in the Sefer Siches, right from Ramleib, the son of the Chavetz Chaim. I wasn't preparing this for the shir, so I didn't remember to look that up beforehand. But these are real issues. Let's diagnose what our personal issue is, see how to solve those issues, and then we'll be zocha once we've done that to get closer and closer to enjoying the most beautiful light, which is the Torah itself. Right? The Torah is or, it brings joy and goodness and happiness, and it solves all our problems and gives us guidance and gives us fortitude and resilience and simcha and esteem and everything good. So now we're just going to say some beautiful divrei Torah about Simchas Torah and about learning Torah that you can take to the meal, you can carry it in your heart, you can share it with other people, and we can grow. So first of all, the Torah itself in Mishlei, Perek Hey, addresses the issue, what if you don't like learning? What do you do? It says, Ayelas ahavim v'ya'alas chen. And the Gemara in Eruvin Nun Dalad says, Shema'ale chen al deha. When you learn Torah, it grows on you and you get into it and you enjoy it. Not only should you learn it on your pace and in your way, like the Chazal say, La'ilam yilmad adam mashan libay chafetz. By the way, look and say for Evan Shleimer from the Vilna Gaon, he has a bunch of very important pieces about how to learn Torah, and you see the Vilna Gaon, who everyone thinks is this uber intense person, he says there about how learning has to be enjoyable, it has to be on your level, that you can understand it and appreciate it. The Chazal say this, the Graz just bring the Chazal. So the Torah is ma'ale chen al deha. It'll grow on you and you'll enjoy it. So I'm going to tell you now, how are we meant to learn Torah and approach Simchas Torah? So Reb Moshe Shmuel Shapiro, who was one of the Gedolim in the past generation, I met him a number of times. I have a picture with him. He says that the simcha of Simchas Torah is lifnei Hashem. This is a spiritual experience. I don't want to sound too hippie, but I want to address that when we learn Torah, a lot of people think that this has nothing to do with Hashem, and this is some sort of machokas between the Litvaks and the Hasidim. Shtuyot, Hevel Havalim. It's not true. We all believe in the same God. And maybe there's some sort of differences about, should you interrupt your learning to think about God in the middle of a sugya? Okay. But the simcha of Torah, Simchas Torah, is a spiritual, meditational experience where we are joyous with Hashem through His Torah. It's a way that we get close to God through the Torah. The Torah is God's will. If you look in Sefer Tanya, it says that God was mitzamtim, He constricted His will into the Torah, into Shor Shanagach Zapara, into the Halacha, and in this way we're able to access and relate to God and think about Him all the time and interact with Him. Let's say you have a best friend. At some point you'll run out of what to talk about, what to do. You can't always be together. So you have something to do together. You have a way to interact. You have some reason, some thing to talk about, to work on, to think about, and now you've created interactions with that person. The Torah every single second of the day gives us a new way to interact with Hashem. What is God's will? What is God doing in the world? What does He want from me? How does He view me? Hashem is so proud of me. What does Hashem want from me in this situation? What's the halacha here? And sometimes that's practical. What bracha do you make on this food? And sometimes it's theoretical, The sugya, according to halacha, is like Rav Huna or like, somebody else, right? So, Rav Moshe Shmuel Shapiro says, Omnam tzrichim ladas shesimcha zu hi simcha lifnei Hashem. If you go through a Simchas Torah, just blowing your brains out on marijuana and drinking lots of alcohol and dancing around like a wilde chaya animal, and God isn't involved in the picture, then that is a Torah without God. And that's not what we're talking about, and that's not the Simchas Torah. Simchas Torah is a simcha with Hashem. It's making a relationship to God through Torah. It's relational. Okay? It's very important that you get that idea. And once that's true, you make a best friend. You get close to God by sitting and learning Gemara, and by always looking and seeing what's God's will. And what does God want from me? What does Hashem want here? And when you sit and you learn a blot of Gemara, it is a havdil, like a monk sitting on a mountain in Tibet somewhere with his eyes closed and his legs folded, and he's sitting and meditating on whatever he's thinking about. We're sitting in Hashem's light. It says in the Gemara in Baruch, when you sit and learn, Hashem is sitting in front of you. He's listening to you. He's with you. Things are being written down. Everyone's watching you. Isn't that incredible? You're mamish meditating with Hashem when you're learning Havayos Abaya de Rava. When you're sitting and learning Gemara, when you're learning Chumash B'Shnayos, you're listening to a shir on the Parsha. It is a profound spiritual experience. Don't have your learning to only be a dry academic thing that's divorced from God and it's purely cerebral. We get close to Hashem by learning Torah. Okay? That's something that I wanted to share from Rabbi Shmuel Shapiro. So, Torah turns us into being a human being. The Imrei Pinchas says, why is it that Shmini Atzeres, the 8th day of the holiday, there are no special mitzvahs on that holiday, right? Sukkot you had the Daled Minim, on Pesach you have matzah. Why on this holiday, the very end of Sukkot, you don't have to shake a Gemara, you don't have to do anything special, there's no special mitzvah except not doing malacha, right? And then you have Simchas Torah, which is this like ancient minhag. So it's like a minhag. So the only thing you do in Shmini Atzeres is don't work and do the ancient minhag of dancing with the Torah. Like, why is it this way? And this is what all the Sfarim are trying to contend with. They're trying to answer this issue. Okay? Says the Imrei Pinchas, the reason why there's only one mitzvah on Shmini Atzeres, and that's to not work. Just don't work. That's the mitzvah, right? It's so that you have the time and the experience to dance and be besimcha with the Torah. Because there's a certain unique beauty and profound spiritual experience of just sitting and learning a block Gemara in the Beis Medrash. And so you can't have a Chol HaMoed. You can't have a Purim. You can't have a situation where work is get involved and your WhatsApp messages and your boss is calling and distractions. No, there's a certain incredibly beautiful, uplifting thing called sitting and learning Torah in the Beis Medrash. Like David HaMelech says, Achas sha'alti me'es Hashem isa avakesh. I only want Hashem from you one thing. Shifti b'veitz Hashem kol yemei chaye nachzos b'rayim Hashem l'vakar beichali. I just want to sit in the Beis Medrash and learn Torah. Why would David Melech want that? Because it's a profound, beautiful, you can't even put words to it, spiritual experience that's the most uplifting, beautiful thing, and go discover that and go find that. And that's why there's no other mitzvah, because if you had other mitzvahs other than dancing around with the Torah, you wouldn't be able to have that experience. And we need that experience in order to give us the energy and the koyach to keep learning Torah and getting close to Hashem the whole year. So that's why that's the only mitzvah of Shmini Atzeres is don't work. That is the answer of the Imre Pinchas, and it's so beautiful. And what I'm trying to convey with the Imre Pinchas or Pinchas of Karetz and Ramesha Shmuel Shapiro is learning isn't divorced from God. It's a way of getting close to God. When you get up from learning a Gemara, you should feel close to God, and you should feel proud, and you should feel happy. You should sit down wherever you are, whatever you're going through, take a little pocket saver with you, listen to a shiur, and feel proud of yourself and feel good. I just got close to Hashem and learned about His will, and I spent time sitting and learning Torah. The Gemara in Saita says on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph that the Aron, the Aron Kodesh in the Mishkan was Naiseh es Naisav, right? The Luchais, the Torah, was placed in the Ark. In the Ark, the Gemara says in Saita Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, it carried the people who would carry the Ark. And this is a Gemara, and what's this idea? So the Rediscover Rebbe in the Sefer Tiferes Shloimeh says, a beautiful idea, that what's unique, different than the Haishanais that we do in Simchas Torah, is that by the Haishanais, we walk around the Torah. So there's a Torah present, it's on the bima, and we're going around the Torah, right? By Simchas Torah, we go and pick up the Torah. We don't just walk around it. We don't just go near it. We don't tiptoe around the Torah. We go over to it and pick it up and dance with it. And when we do that, it's Noisei es Noisav. The Torah picks us up. And the Rediscover Rebbe says we weren't ready yet until the very end of Sukkot, after the Yerach HaYisanim, after a month of tons of mitzvahs and the slichas and the shofar and just the Yom Kippur fasting and all the stuff that we did. We have huge six-packs and muscles of mitzvahs now. We have tons of light. We're bursting with holy, holy light. And we're now ready not just to tiptoe near the Torah, but to go pick it up and dance with it. And when we do that, it lifts us up and it's going to carry us over through the rest of the year, because the Aron HaKodesh is Noisei es Noisav. It picks up the people that pick it up. And if you remember in the beginning of this video, I told you about a Rebbe that went through profound suffering and terrible things, just the worst Yisurim, and he would sit and learn Torah. And it says, Mumle Sayrascha Sha'ashuai Azavadati Ba'ani. David HaMelech says, if I didn't have the Torah to get me through this time and to enjoy the hard times, I would just get lost in my suffering. And we made a video about that recently, right? And that might be really hard for some people watching this video to hear. But we can't deny that David went through a lot of terrible suffering in his life, of every type, with his children, and being chased, and he must have had so much trauma and difficulty. He was the biggest mammon of Hashem with all these Yisurim. He said, if I didn't have the Torah, I wouldn't have been able to get through it. So the Rediscover says, when you pick up the Torah, it picks you up. When I saw my Rebbe, who was going through the Yisurim, picking up a Gemara and learning it, it picked him up. And that's the lesson that I want to tell everybody here. I've seen this myself with other people. I've experienced this, and I want to share that gift with you. Believe that it's possible and try to figure out how to get there and make the Torah do that for you. I told you, just this Shabbos, I went from my house to shul. I sat and learned 3-4 hours in a row, Maseches Sanhedrin. It was the most beautiful thing. Nothing special. I didn't make a siyum. I didn't do anything crazy. It was just the sweetest, most sublime experience. And anybody can have that, and we can have that all the time. It's munach b'keren zavis. People say, and I saw this inside before, that reportedly Rabbi Akiva Eger, people saw that he one time picked up a Sefer Torah and a very metaphysical event occurred where the Torah danced with him. I don't know what that means, and I've never seen that before, but I can believe that, okay? Rabbi Akiva Eger picked up the Torah and the Torah danced with him, but the Rediscover says the Torah is an enormous light. And it's so big and powerful, you can't just approach it right away. You have to be metzamtzem. You have to do tzimtzumim. And this is a big idea. You have to, it's like, I like to say, there are some things that are very, very powerful, like a nuclear power plant. And you want to shave, right? You can't plug your shaver into the uranium core of the power plant. You're going to blow up and die, right? You need many, many technologies from the power plant all the way to your Bic, whatever the company is, shaver, because I'm not a shaving guy, so I'm sorry, Jeanette, whatever, shaver, in order for the massive amount of energy and electricity to be channeled into something that you can actually plug into and it will be useful, okay? So the Rediscover says, the mitzvahs do that for us. The mitzvahs shape us as people. If you notice, the mitzvahs are full of rules and regulations. Do this, don't do this. Do this, don't do this. What's the point of that? When we do that, we're shaping our behavior. We're building who we are. We're creating discipline. We're doing much more than that, but we're also even doing that. And when we do that, it creates the kelim, the tools for us to sit and learn the Torah and receive its light in the right way. You may not have ever encountered this, but there is a certain type of person in the world that they can sit and learn Torah, and it makes them psychotic, it throws them over the edge, it makes them off kilter, it makes them lose touch with reality, right? They learn all these sublime ideas and spiritual experiences, and they lose touch with reality. So the Torah is very about reality. Make a ha'adama. Make an alamichya. You have to eat it toch k'dei achilas pras. It's a machlekes Reb Shlomo Zalman and Reb Moshe, right? Everything is very specific and it's grounded and it's there to tie us and anchor us down so that we can understand the right parameters of how to approach the Torah in a way that it has utility and works for us and is useful for us. Rav Dessler says in Chelik Daled of Michtav Eliyahu, page 261, that there were two characteristics of the Aron Kodesh. One of them was it was Eina Mina Mida, which means it didn't occupy any physical space. It was miraculous, but the Aron HaKodesh did not occupy physical space in the room. Okay? The second miracle that it did was Naise es Naisab, like we said from the Gemara in Saitan Laman Hayam and Aleph. It would pick up the people that were holding onto the poles of the ark. And Rav Dessler says these two things are the same thing. That the Aron Kodesh didn't occupy physical space. And so when you would go and pick it up and hold it, it would pull you into this sublime, metaphysical, spiritual place that therefore you didn't take up space. So you were just floating in the air. So these two miracles worked together. And what was the technology? Was it a Tesla coil? Was it battery-powered, solar-powered, hydro-powered? The answer is, Reb Dessler says, the Torah has such enormous kedusha coming out of it that it's almost not part of this world. And so that is the koach, that when you go over to it and you grab onto it and you're holding the Torah and you're dancing the Torah, it lifts you up and takes you to another place. Your feet are no longer touching the ground, you're floating. So you're somewhat in this world, but you're not carrying the burden anymore, and you're floating through this world instead of schlepping through this world. And that's the idea of going to the Torah, dancing with it, singing with it, and it lifting us up as people. Rav Pinkus says, so beautiful, so beautiful. Rav Pinkus says that we had a whole month of holidays, and then we end up with Simchas Torah. What does Simchas Torah have to do with this? Why is that the ending of this whole month of holidays? He says, at the end of the year, we get very sick. It's a mashal to a person, Le'aleinu, who's very, very deathly ill. They need to be intubated in the hospital, mordam or munsham. They need a lung machine to help them breathe. They need feeding tubes to give them food, and they just can't live on their own. And he says, that's how sick we became. And so we had to clean ourselves out and, fight with antibiotics, the different zihumim, infections and different things in the body, and deal with the illnesses and clean it up. And when we're ready and we get pure enough and healthy enough after all these mitzvahs and the fasting and the Rosh Hashanah, then we're ready to be extubated. It's time for the hospital and the doctors to take the feeding tube and, out of the person's stomach, to take the breathing tube out of their throat, and to see if they can live on their own. Okay? So he says that's Simchas Torah, because the rest of the year, you don't have a lot of holidays. It's just you and Hashem and the Torah. So we're going to pull away now everything and just give you a Sefer Torah. And you're meant now to go through the rest of the year with the Torah. And if you're a healthy person, you can get up from your hospital bed and you can be discharged from the hospital. That's Simchas Torah. We get extubated, the tubes get pulled out of us, and we're able to grab the Torah and dance with it and sing with it and make big plans for the future, excited how we're going to grow this year and learn Torah and get through the long, dark winter with learning Torah and keeping Torah. And that shows that we're healthy people. So I thought that was just a beautiful mashal. That's in Sefer HaTorah V'Kinyana on page 52 of Rav Pinkus. Coming near the very, very end of some divrei Torah here, Rav Mendel Kaplan says that you can make a relationship with the Torah. And just like we said from Ramesha Shmuel Shapiro, the simcha of Simchas Torah is in Lifnei Hashem, it's with Hashem. It's not just divorced from Hashem, and God is in one place and the Beis Medrash or somewhere else. It's a simcha with Hashem through the Torah. So Rav Mendel Kaplan, who was one of the big, very special, influential people in America from pre-war Europe and a Talmud of Rav Elchanan Wasserman, amongst other people, and Rosh Yeshiva eventually in Chicago and in Philadelphia, beautiful art scroll book. He says on page 77 that a Masechta of Gemara is like a whole world, and you can even create a relationship with a Masechta, and you can talk to a Masechta. It sounds silly, right? But I know this to be true. I took my boys to the Mir Yeshiva the other day, and I was showing them a tour. And we went to the Merkazi, if you know where that is, the main building, and we went upstairs near the Eitzer, and we went to the airplane, if you know what that is, different Beis Medrashes in the Mir, and we saw a beautiful American yeshiva bacher sitting there. He had a Gemara and Rishonim and Achronim sitting all by himself, Bein Azmanim, no one's around, and he's saying, if you say this, then this, but if you say, and he's busy making all these calculations, and he's talking to himself. Who is he talking to? He's talking to the Torah, and the Torah is listening. And it's a relational thing. And I'm being really real with you. I'm being honest. I'm being honest. We want to have a feeling that we are never alone and we're understood and we have a place to go and people to listen to us and to be surrounded with meaningful people. I'm trying to add to your social network God and His Torah. I'm asking you to try to understand and relate to God as a relationship and the Torah as a relationship. And that is what Rav Mendel Kaplan is talking about in his book, page 77. And by the way, huge Hashgacha Pratis, the sentence before, he teaches a lesson here about the Aron Kodesh picking up the people that are holding on to it, just like we spoke about. There's a famous story in the Sefer Toras Habayis of the Chavetz Chaim about Maseches Chagiga, that a man learned Maseches Chagiga many, many times, and he died, and nobody came to the funeral. And Maseches Chagiga came down in the form of a beautiful person and attended and arranged his funeral. Okay? You can make a relationship with Torah and live your life with Torah. And when you're sitting by yourself in your apartment and you're all lonely with your troubles, you can open a sefer and find God and find the Torah there, and it's a relationship, and strengthen that relationship and make that relationship, and it's a real thing. I wouldn't lie to you. It's a real thing, and I experience it. Last quote is from Shraga Feivel Mendelevitz. Could you hand me the book over there for a second? I just want to show everyone the book. Famous art scroll book, thank you. From Shraga Feivel Mendelevitz. Very powerful book. These are real classics, guys. If you didn't read them, you got to read them. Many times in this book, it has a glossary. Many times it references to Simchas Torah. Reb Shraga Feivel Mendelevitz says, and with this I end, he says, even when he's deathly sick, he's not going to stay in bed if it's on Simchas Torah, because he knows for a fact that when he started Yeshiva Torah Vadas and pioneered Torah in the very early 20th century in New York, he says he knows for an absolute fact that it was the dancing on Simchas Torah that got a lot of people to be from and develop a relationship to Torah. They were able to say, Torah isn't such a dry thing. It's not such a bad thing. It's not a source of pain. These guys are dancing with it. There must be something beautiful about it. And if they're faking, then I'll see right through it. But they're not even faking. They're being real. Avi Tenenbaum is busy talking for an hour about Torah. He probably believes what he's saying. It's real. It's incredible. So Rav Shraga Feivel says he built Yeshivas Torah Vadas on the dancing of Simchas Torah. That's how important it was. So the dancing, guys, is a glimpse of the relationship that the Lomdei Torah have with the Torah. Go look at a big Talmud Chacham and a Rav, see how he's dancing with such simcha, and say, "Ooh, he has a close relationship with Torah. I want one like that too. How do I start to date the Torah? How do I get engaged to Torah? How do I get married to Torah and spend quality time and date night with the Torah? How do I make such a relationship?" That's what we're talking about. It's Lifnei Hashem with the Torah. Let's strengthen our relationship. I know that one of the most important things I've ever seen in my life was an older bacher. He doesn't know this, but if I see him and I run into him now, I'll tell this to him. A certain older chashav bacher in the yeshiva today, he's a big Talmud Chacham, but when I was young, he was 6 years older than me, and we would sing and dance, Achas sho'alti meyes Hashem, Achas sho'alti, right? We would sing all the songs of Torah in this uber Litvish yeshiva I was in, and he would sing with his eyes closed with such kavana and such sublime joy. And he again was another role model of someone that it was so authentic, it was so real, and it cut through all the barriers and all the trauma and difficulties they had with Torah. I said, that guy's Torah, I want his Torah. I want that experience. I need that in my life. So I bless everyone. I give you a bracha. We should discover the most beautiful relationship with Torah and date the Torah and marry the Torah and spend quality time with it. Take it with us everywhere we go. It's a real thing, guys. It's a real thing. And to make a connection with Hashem, and if we had bad experiences, we'll work those through. And if Torah was always above our level, we'll try to find their place. And if it always burned us out, we're going to try to figure out how to negotiate that. Let's solve the issues. Let's figure this out, and we're going to be blessed with the gift of the Torah. Thank you very much.